So good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for being here. It is a privilege to be speaking to so many people that have registered for this webinar and are clearly committed to supporting the students that they work with, especially those who perhaps face additional challenges or need a little bit more support than the regular Joe Soap in the classroom. We have almost 1,000 people registered for the webinar today from across the globe. And everybody's tuned in to hear the wonderful Nick Late speak about the new JCQ regulations, and maybe also to listen a little bit to me to talk about a new test that's coming onto the market later this year that hopefully will help support you and your students. So just before we begin, a few little housekeeping pieces. Now, I must call out that if there's a delay between me speaking and the PowerPoint slides, we've had to tag team a little bit today. So there's 3 of us working this webinar. There's myself, Rebecca, there's Nick, and there's my colleague Sanette in the background working the PowerPoint slides because, well, technical pieces, but that's why if there's delays. But a few housekeeping pieces. First of all, you will all have access to the PowerPoint slides after the presentation. They'll be sent to you within the next 24 hours. You'll also have a recording of the webinar, so don't worry if you've missed something. You can always go back and watch the recording afterwards. We're scheduled today to run from 6 to 8. That's going to be a brief introduction like now, also introduce a new test. The main event, which is Nick, and we shall have some Q&A there afterwards as well. On the note of Q&A, if you do have questions as we work through the webinar, can you please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen? Or some of them, it might be the top of the screen, depending what device you're on. Not the chat box. It's too difficult to monitor the chat and the Q&A. So if you could just use the Q&A for your questions, that would be great. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rebecca Good. I am an educational psychologist and director of Education Elephant. I have over 20 years experience working with schools and parents in the areas of assessment and in supporting students. And my real area of expertise actually probably is test development and assessment. And I'm joined by the ever familiar Mr. Nick Late, who is the guru of access arrangements, and he's head of examinations with the JCQ. So we're delighted to have you here today, Nick. Thank you as always. Okay, so I thought I would start off this webinar by presenting probably one of the main challenges that most of you on here are educators, teachers working in schools, although I think we do have a few parents as well. But I guess I'm speaking to the educators here. One of the main challenges we face really is time. Teachers, we're all facing increasing pressures to support our students, but we are stretched a little bit thin, both in terms of time and also in terms of access to assessments and resources to support our students. The reality probably is that schools are busier than ever. We're not just teaching, we're also creating lesson plans, providing pastoral care, and on top of all that, trying to do our assessment work and access arrangements too. So with the ever-growing area of student support and the ever-growing area of assessments, this is where our frustration lies. We don't really have enough time. But we all want to help our students, so we can't create time out of thin air. So what do? Well, Education Elephant, for those of you that don't know us, is there to support students, and we're there to support you. And one of the areas that we focus on in Education Elephant is test development and resources. So I want to start off by just taking a few slides to introduce you to an exciting new digital test, which is coming out this year. And I hope is going to support many of you in the classroom with your time, but most importantly, to help you support your students. So next slide. The name of the assessment is SWIFT. It's a cutting-edge digital assessment tool designed for 11 to 18-year-olds. It's built to be fast, accurate, but most importantly, easy to use for teachers and for students. And it really will transform the way in which you assess students for support and also for access arrangements. So next slide. At its core, we are looking at a comprehensive assessment with 5 different individual or standalone subtests within it. And each of those 5 subtests assess the core areas of cognitive functioning and academic achievement that lead to success. And they are reading fluency, and we all know these areas are so important, spelling, maths fluency, processing speed, really important, and working memory. So they aren't just random tests, they're all directly aligned with indicators of learning difficulties, and each of them play a super important role in learning. Coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, they also correspond with the core requirements for the JCQ's access arrangements. That means then that the data you get from Swift is not just insightful, it's also actionable, and you can immediately use it to support your students when applying for access arrangements, but moreover, to support them in the classroom and support them throughout their academic journey. So one of the main points we said was time. So Swift is designed to be a group assessment. So it's all delivered through headphones. So students literally put on the headphones, everything is administered through them, all the instructions, meaning that you can spend your time observing the students, providing support rather than handling the flow of the assessment or delivering instructions. Next slide. Once your testing with Swift is complete, you've got all of your results, which are color-coded and available immediately. So you don't have to wait days or weeks or score up any pen and paper tests, no complex tables. Everything has very easy interpretation. So at a glance, you can see which students are performing well and which students might need a little bit of extra support or indeed an access arrangement. So for example, a student that scores low in reading fluency might have their results highlighted in yellow or in red, indicating that they need a little bit closer attention. And that kind of visual feedback simplifies your decision making. You don't need to really do too much interpretation, and it allows you then move from assessment to intervention much more quickly. Good for you and good for the student as well, because we all know early intervention is key. So that's a whistle-stop tour of Swift, but what does it all mean in the bigger picture? So really, by using Swift, you're not just ticking a box for another assessment, you're really gaining clear, data-driven picture of each student's unique learning profile and then allowing you to take immediate action. So imagine for a second the impact that will have on your classroom and on you. You'll know what students need extra time, who needs reading or a maths intervention, what student might benefit from a change to your teaching strategy or an access arrangement. You'll have the tools to individualize learning in ways that weren't possible before. There are no group working memory really or group processing speed tests that are freely available on the market or easily available on the market. Nothing is free anymore, unfortunately. But when you're equipped with that kind of insight that Swift can give you, you're really not just supporting the student, you're setting them up for success in the future, which really was what access arrangements are all about, setting students up for success. So with that whistle-stop tour, because I don't want to take away from Nick's main presentation, as I said, he is the main event, but I thought it was important to introduce the new test developments and new tools on the market. If your school is interested in finding out more details on Swift and the different kinds of subtests, you can contact Education Elephant. The website is there, or you can contact us via email. So I think without further ado, I am going to hand you over to Nick, who's going to bring you through the regulations for 24-25. Nick?
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. So as Rebecca said, I'm Nick Leet. I'm Head of Examination Services at the JCQ. I am sure that some of you, if not quite a lot of you, have received emails from me, as well as obviously perhaps meeting me in person. So obviously what I'm going to do is take you through obviously the changes to the JCQ regulations for this academic year. And then, as Rebecca said, hopefully we will have time, or we will have time, obviously, to answer your questions on the JCQ regulations. Okay, so next slide. Right, so for those of you obviously that are Sencos, for those of you that work in FE colleges, because obviously I know that the term Senco isn't used in FE and sixth form colleges, and we may have some Elencos from Wales. So the JCQ regulations have changed this year, so they are in a new format, and Rebecca and I were just discussing that and sort of saying how more hopefully you are finding them more user friendly. So they are an interactive PDF document. And hopefully this will allow those of you that, as I say, that are SENCOs, access arrangements coordinators, deputy SENCOs, assistant SENCOs, I could go on, to find information much more quickly within that particular document. Next one. So as you can see, obviously what we have is tabs down the left-hand side. So if, for example, you selected chapter 5 down the left-hand side, that will take you straight to chapter 5, where there is a chapter summary. And if you actually clicked on, say, 25% extra time, it will take you straight to section 5.2. If you actually clicked on 5.5 readers, computer readers, it would take you to the information straight there regarding the use of a computer reader. So obviously they're the tabs. Throughout the document, there are clickable links. So in some cases, so for example, like the rules regarding the use of a word processor, they're found in the JCQ document instructions for conducting examinations, what we commonly call the ICE document. So it would take you straight to the ICE document. And you can zoom in and zoom out. So if you want to make the text larger, you can do so. Okay, so you can zoom in and zoom out. And then as standard, the changes are highlighted throughout the regulations in yellow. Obviously, there is a summary of, as usual, there is a summary of the key changes for 24-25. So if you are an experienced Senco, you could go straight to the key changes for 24-25, and there you could actually see what they are. So I do hope that you find that these JCQ regulations in this revised style are more user-friendly and will help you to actually to find information more easily, more quickly. You're able to navigate the document. Okay, next one. So just to summarize, obviously we have the use of color. We've got the use of interactive chapter tabs. We've got the use of clickable links throughout the document, and obviously those useful chapter summaries. So for example, information on chapter 5 and the available access arrangements, a chapter summary regarding modified papers, chapter 6, a chapter summary regarding the use of AAO chapter 8. So obviously, as I say, a new design for 24-25. Next one. Right, now what we are seeking to do here is, I can see someone's clapping, so I don't know who's doing that, but thank you very much. I do appreciate that. It's very kind of you. So what we're trying to do here is sort of rebalance. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that I and awarding body colleagues, sometimes my colleagues are in the JCQ Centre Inspection Service, we do get queries where the answer is in the document. So, I might receive a query and someone will say to me, oh, can you please explain to me what an exemption is? Well, with all due respect, I haven't got the time to actually to write a detailed email regarding an exemption from a component. So let's say, for example, the candidate has a very severe speech impediment and will not be able to complete the speaking component of a GCSE French specification and the spoken language endorsement of a GCSE English language specification in England. So I would say, please see section 517 of the JCQ regulations, which explains the process for exemptions. So there is quite a block of emails where the answer is in the JCQ regulations, whether that be the access arrangements document or the relevant section of the JCQ document instructions for conducting examinations. So what we are saying is that obviously please check those documents, whether that be the access arrangements or the ICE documents, before sending a query to the JCQ and or an awarding body. You've read the document, you've checked it, you're certain that your query isn't in there, and you need a response. Now that's absolutely fine, because the access arrangements document cannot cover the entire myriad of every single possible reasonable adjustment. You may have a candidate with very specific needs. So to give you an example, I had somebody a couple of weeks back, right at the start of this new term. So the student needed to write using a pink pen because they had social, emotional, and mental health issues. Now that's fine, because the regulations don't cover the use of pink pen, so that would be an other arrangement. Somebody else sent an email and said, could we photocopy an awarding body question paper onto black paper with white font? Well, if you can do that, that's absolutely fine. So there will be some queries, absolutely, that are not in those JCQ regulations. But what we're just saying is, before sending emails to the JCQ and or an awarding body, just double check that the answer isn't in that document. And that should be easier this year, given we've now got the PDF interactive version of the AARA document, and indeed the ICE is also in that interactive PDF format. Next one. Now, the other one obviously is that we are rebalancing or refocusing to say that the centre must make decisions on appropriate access arrangements for their candidates. So the JCQ, an awarding body, cannot make the decision for the centre. And I think it's probably fair to say that we got two big blocks of emails that are received. So one block is where the answer is in the document, and then another block where people are saying, what do you think? What should I do? Is this okay? Can I award 25% extra time? And it's that we need to row back on, because it needs to be the judgment of the Senco whether that student needs 25% extra time. So people don't need to keep checking in and saying, oh, is it okay if I award a reader? Is it okay if I award a scribe? Because we cannot make the decision. That has to be the professional judgment of the Senco. And you've got the framework of those JCQ regulations, which are very comprehensive, which obviously set out the evidence which is required, where required, I should say, because there are some arrangements like a prompter, examination reading pen, where you don't need any evidence. But where you do, that is set out within the JCQ regulations. So, for example, 25% extra time, more than 25% extra time. So you've got that framework, and you're making that decision based on those JCQ regulations, based on your knowledge of that particular candidate and their normal way of working. So next slide. So, as I say, the centre basically must decide the access arrangements, because the JCQ, an awarding body, will not have a working knowledge of that candidate's disabilities, of their needs, because we won't know how those difficulties impact in the classroom or in timed internal school tests, mock examinations. So you could have a student that their disability, their difficulty doesn't impact in subjects such as maths, science, short answer, MFL answers, but it does have a substantial and adverse effect. The candidate does have persistent, significant difficulties when working in subjects like English language, English literature, geography, history, religious studies, to those subjects which are very essay style, text heavy. So we do not know what teachers have said about that candidate, what support staff have said, what's been written in school reports, etc. So that's why we cannot make the initial decision. Now, there are going to be, of course, some arrangements which are automatically rejected, not approved by the online system, and they are referred to the awarding body, but that's basically where the Senco had already made that decision. So they have decided the candidate needs, for example, a practical assistant. The candidate does need more than 25% extra time. The candidate will need an exemption from a whole component or unit because of their disability. So even there, even where you've got those applications which are being referred to the relevant awarding body, the Senco has still made that decision that based on their knowledge of that student, based on comments, feedback, observations that have come through from teaching staff, support staff, conversations with the student, perhaps with their parents, what's being written in pupil reports, as well as looking at pupil attainment data, pupil tracking data, etc. They've been able to paint that picture of need, demonstrate their normal way of working. And so it is the responsibility of the Senco to be making those appropriate and informed decisions based on the JCQ regulations. And there's often quite a block of emails that I will have to respond to and say, I am very sorry, but I cannot make the decision for you. It has to be your professional judgment. And where the Senco, needs the support, particularly if you've got sort of perhaps, a division of opinion, then it is obviously for a relevant member of the senior leadership team to be supporting the Senco, to be guiding the Senco, helping them to come to that informed decision on what are the most appropriate and reasonable adjustments for that candidate. Okay, so next slide. Right, okay, so to ensure that Sencos have confidence in making decisions and understanding the JCQ regulations, and it is the responsibility of the head of centre, so i.e. head teacher, principal, so they must ensure that the Senco and the centre's appointed assessor undertake regular CPD, such as attending an annual update course on the JCQ regulations. Now, I'm talking to the converted here because I can see that 202 of you have joined to listen to me, and previously to me, Rebecca. So you're all, actually wanting to keep abreast of the JCQ regulations, hearing what I'm saying, but obviously it is important for heads of centre to ensure that their Senco and the centre's appointed assessor are undertaking regular CPD and they are undertaking an annual update course. Because, even last week when I was doing a Q&A session, there were queries such as, is an examination reading pen recorded on Form 9? Well, no, because that's a centre delegated access arrangement. And when we introduced the Form 9 last year, there were quite a lot of people who actually said, oh, so where do I record the need for a word processor? Because I can't see it within Part 1 of Form 9. And I had to point out to them that actually writing file notes for the use of a word processor, they had been wasting their time, unfortunately, because the use of a word processor with the spelling and grammar check switched off is a centre delegated access arrangement. Evidence of need is not required. And again, I had somebody last week who explained to me that the student required an alternative rooming arrangement for their examinations last summer. They've now progressed from GCSE to A-level, and they said to me, "Oh well, so I'll have to be processing another application for other, won't I?" And I said, "No. You don't need to process an online application for other." So it's important, obviously, that the Senco and the centre's appointed assessor do understand the JCQ regulations. The head of centres ensuring that, so they can then, going back to my previous slide, they can make informed decisions, determine the most appropriate access arrangements, and know the evidence they need to be putting in place where required. So regular CPD is absolutely key. Okay, next one. Right, so online applications must only be processed where they are supported by the centre and the candidate meets the published criteria for the arrangements with the full supporting evidence in place. So there is no point in processing an online application if the candidate doesn't meet the published criteria. If the candidate doesn't meet the criteria, you can't complete Part 1 of Form 8, then there's no point in assessing the candidate. You can't actually complete Part 1 of Form 9 where the candidate has a medical condition because the teaching staff haven't actually seen any difficulties. To them, the candidate is working in line with expectations. So we have seen instances where centres have been processing online applications, they have been rejected and then referred to the relevant awarding bodies, so that the awarding body can then say no, and then the Senco can then take that back within the centre, for example. So this is absolutely important, that online applications must only be processed where they are supported by the centre and the candidate meets the published criteria with the full supporting evidence in place. And that is important to the awarding bodies as well, so that they can focus on those genuine awarding body referrals, such as I say, more than 25% extra time, a practical assistant, the use of an exemption or other, which could be in rare and exceptional circumstances, a language modifier, a particular piece of specialist equipment, for example. Okay, so moving forward, important that you obviously take this into account, take this on board. Only process online applications where you have the full supporting evidence in place, the candidate meets the published criteria as per the JCQ regulations. And that may mean difficult conversations with a student, with a parent, but you will have to explain to the student and all the parent that they do not meet, or say to the parent that their child doesn't meet the published criteria for that arrangement, and not actually do an online application, gets not approved, refer it to the awarding body, and then the awarding body comes back and says, no, you need to be having that conversation, the explanation of those access arrangements within the centre with the parents, and also, or perhaps with the student as well, pointing out to them, look, you don't meet the criteria for extra time. Okay, next one. Right, so something new. So changes to access arrangements online. So access arrangements online now includes the following qualifications. So it includes BTEC qualifications. So that would be level 1, level 2 BTEC qualifications, such as BTEC First, BTEC Tech Awards, and then the level 3 BTECs, BTEC Nationals. So BTEC qualifications have come back into access arrangements online after, I think it's about a 7-year absence. They also, so access arrangements online also covers functional skills qualifications offered by AQA and Pearson, and they also cover Pearson's T-level qualifications. So for those of you, I was about to say for those of you that work in colleges, but it equally could be a school, but particularly obviously for colleges who might be doing BTEC qualifications and functional skills qualifications equally. You could be a school and you've got a student who's doing, say, 2 A-levels and a level 3 BTEC National. I hope that will make a important change. It will make life easier, instead of actually, say, processing the candidate's GCSE application using access arrangements online. And then you then had to previously go into PAAO, Pearson's own online system, to process an online application for a BTEC qualification. So they are now, if you like, all under one roof. So I do hope that will make a real difference across schools and colleges who are doing those qualifications. Next one. So this is another, I hope, good news story. So you saw the first good news story. So the second one, and I think it's fair to say that this took everybody by surprise. I think all of us didn't think that actually you would have quite a substantial block of candidates with learning difficulties who also needed supervised rest breaks. And previously, of course, you would have had to have completed Form 8 if that student needed 25% extra time and or a scribe. And if they additionally needed supervised rest breaks, then you would have had to have completed Form 9. So you were completing 2 forms for the same student. So we've fixed that. I know certainly some people actually spoke to their JCQ centre inspector about that when they received an access arrangements inspection. So as I say, that has now been fixed. So moving forward, so within Part 1 of Form 8, you can now record the need for supervised rest breaks for those candidates with learning difficulties who also require 25% extra time and or a scribe. So that follows the same pattern as for a reader, because obviously what we have said obviously is that where a student require 25% extra time, and a computer reader, the need for the computer reader could be recorded within part 1 of Form 8. So we've now put supervised rest breaks in there as well. So you can see obviously that, when you raise feedback, it does find its way into the JCQ regulations. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time. So like obviously the reintegration of the BTEC qualifications into AAO. This one was much quicker, but I hope it shows obviously that we do listen and we do take into account your views, and we do obviously try therefore to amend the regulations to make it easier for you just to try and reduce down even more that administrative burden that obviously you invariably endure that examination administration entails. So we are obviously trying to make life easier for you. Next one. Right, so in terms of supervised rest breaks, so a single supervised rest break should be no more than 30 minutes in duration. Now, what I'm going to say to you is should be no more than. We're not saying must not be more than 30 minutes in duration. Now, you could have a candidate who has a very significant physical disability. They have a very serious medical condition. They have a very serious mental health condition. That student may need a supervised rest break, which is more than 30 minutes in duration. And that's absolutely fine. If that has been their normal way of working in internal school tests, that has been their normal way of working in mock examinations, that rest break of more than 30 minutes is absolutely crucial to get them through the examination. And this is important that that we're allowing these young people to demonstrate their skills, their knowledge and understanding, so they can then obviously progress to the next stage of their education or into the world of employment. So it's very important, obviously, that we recognise needs of students with disabilities and other difficulties. So just to say, that doesn't mean you can't give any more than 30 minutes. You may know of students within your school who will need a supervised rest break of more than 30 minutes in duration. That's fine. But often the supervised rest break will be shorter than that, okay? So this is basically just good advice. So for the majority of your students, they will not need a rest break of up to 30 minutes in duration. It will often be shorter than that, but conversely, there may be one or two candidates with very exceptional difficulties, and they might need, 40-minute supervised rest break, a 45-minute supervised rest break, etc. Okay, next one. Right, now the key obviously is that candidates cannot be, so this is mandatory, so they cannot be given as many supervised rest breaks as they like for as long as they like. And I'm sure that your examination officers would be tearing their hair out if you did, because obviously for the exams officer, it is a logistical challenge, and that's really, if you like, the art of supervised rest breaks is to try and sort of strike that balance between the needs of the candidate, as well as obviously recognizing the logistical challenges. And I know obviously that some people do like that, that flat 25% extra time, but I do think that perhaps sometimes supervised rest breaks, are underutilized, and they obviously are, a better preparation for some students for the world of work, because when they go out into the world of work, they're not going to be given 25% extra time, but they could be given a rest break because of their disability in the workplace. So just think of that, is extra time really the most appropriate arrangement for that student? Would a supervised rest break be better? So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a stinking migraine. I suffer from migraines. And I just had to sort of, close my eyes for about 10 minutes. And if that was an exam, supervised rest breaks, extra time wouldn't help me. It really wouldn't. It would have a detrimental effect on my examination performance. But if I could have a supervised rest breaks, perhaps leave the examination room, duly supervised, of course, get some fresh air, or perhaps just go and sit in a small room, quiet room, just to sort of close my eyes, see if it sort of helps, then that would be better for me as a migraine sufferer than extra time. Okay, so that's the key though there. You cannot give candidates as many supervised rest breaks as they like for as long as they like. And a supervised rest break will not normally be required within the first 10 minutes of an examination. Now, again, note the word will not normally be required. We're not saying that's banned because, again, you may have a candidate, you may know of a candidate in your school, in your college, who the moment they actually see that question paper, it will have an adverse effect on their mental health, on their anxiety, which is already established. So the moment they see that question paper, they will just, go into breakdown mode. And that student will need to be taken out of the examination room, will need to be calmed down. They sort of recompose themselves and then they can come back in and start the examination. So that's key. It's like the first one when I was talking to you about. This isn't a supervised rest break, must not be given within the first 10 minutes of an examination, but maybe thereafter. We're saying here will not normally be required. So there may be individual candidates with, as I say, severe anxiety, a significant mental health issue, where they will, sort of go into breakdown mode, will become so anxious they have to leave the examination room and be calmed, for example, by a head of year, a member of staff with pastoral responsibilities. Okay, so just thought it's important to give clarity to this piece around supervised rest breaks. Next slide. So specialist evidence is not required for inspection purposes. Okay, so for supervised rest breaks, if you had a candidate with a mental health condition, severe anxiety, then it would just be part 1 and part 3 of Form 9. You do not need to complete part 2. And the duration of the supervised rest break is determined by the Senco. So the Senco determines the supervised rest break. Obviously, that information will need to be given to the exams team so that they basically know, obviously, what candidates will be given supervised rest breaks for how long, how frequent. Okay, and obviously that will vary, from student to student. So unfortunately, you can't have a one size fits all when it comes to supervised rest breaks, because you will be dealing with candidates with individual needs whose illness, disability may basically vary. So the Senco makes a decision, and that is based on the candidate's normal way of working when they are undertaking completing timed assessments, so such as end of year internal school tests, mock examinations. That is how they work. That's the typical duration of a supervised rest break, and also that is how frequently they need it. Okay, so that's supervised rest breaks. Next slide. Right, so the rolling forward of a Form 8 from GCSE qualifications now includes other Level 3 qualifications. So it isn't just GCE, AS and A-level qualifications. It will include BTEC Nationals, which are Level 3 qualifications. It could include AQA Applied General qualifications. It could include WJC Level 3 vocational qualifications. So hopefully this will obviously again help you where you're rolling forward a Form 8 from GCSE to Level 3 qualifications. Okay, not just AS, A-level. It will cover those Level 3 qualifications which are included within Access Arrangements Online. Obviously, I've given you some examples of those. Right, next slide. Now, the Form 8 should be perceived as a passport to access arrangements which travels with the candidate. So if you are an 11 to 16 school, you don't have a sixth form, and students will move on to a sixth form college, or they'll move on to another local school which has a sixth form, then the Form 8 should basically move forward with that student. It's their passport. And what we are really trying to hammer home this year, obviously, is that SENCOs must provide this evidence to assist their counterparts in FE and sixth form colleges. And I don't know, I'm sure we probably have got people here from the FE community. And I do know, obviously, sometimes, the cohorts for GCSE English language and GCSE maths can be huge, thousands of candidates sometimes, with a high percentage of students with learning difficulties and disabilities. And if you think of a November GCSE examination series, even a summer series, when you've basically only got sort of, 2 terms at the most, it is really hard work for our colleagues in the FE sector. So we are trying to help them. So for those of you that are SENCOs working in schools, please do help your FE colleges. And we're trying to sort of reinforce this, that is the Form 8 is that student's passport to access arrangements and travels with the candidate. Now, I did have one centre, and what they did, you may think, yes, that's a good idea. You may not think it's a good idea, but what they did is that they put a copy of the Form 8 into the candidate's GCSE results envelope. So the candidate actually within their envelope had a candidate statement of provisional results, which showed their GCSE results, and they also had a copy of their Form 8. So that might be something that you want to consider as a school. You might actually decide, no, we will actually forward that on to the student's FE college. We'll send it on to the additional learning needs. We'll send it on to the learning support team within that FE college, and you will actually send them a PDF version of Form 8 so that they can then actually use that to award 25% extra time and or a scribe. Next slide. Now, obviously, this is absolutely key in that the Senco must thoroughly check the Form 8 before forwarding it on to another centre, ensuring it has been fully completed, signed and dated. And I had one very recently where I think that was a sixth form college where they received the Form 8, they received the assessor certificate, but the certificate was not a postgraduate qualification in individual specialist assessment at or equivalent to level 7. So I had to politely explain to them, you can't use that Form 8, you can't complete Form 8 RF, and that means that you're going to have to reassess the candidate and complete a new Form 8. So it is really important, obviously, that the Form 8 has been thoroughly checked before it is forwarded onto another centre, ensuring it has been fully completed. Part 1's been completed, Part 2 and Part 3 signed and dated, because the Senco at the receiving centre, whether that be an 11 to 18 school, a sixth form college, an FE college, the Form 8 they equally must check that Form 8 to ensure that all parts have been completed, it has been signed and dated, because the Form 8 cannot be amended retrospectively. So where an incomplete Form 8 has been provided, the candidate must be reassessed to determine the need for 25% extra time and or a scribe. Okay, the same would apply for GCSE resits and Form 9. And although file notes no longer exist, because obviously we now have Form 9, the only time you'd be using a file note is if a candidate had a temporary illness or temporary injury at the time of their examination and required a temporary access arrangement. But I do recall one centre last year telling me that they had received a file note from another centre. It was for a reader, and it literally was, and I'm not making this up, this is completely true, candidate has asthma, candidate needs reader. And of course, you can't award a reader because the candidate is asthmatic, and that had to be explained to the parents, which didn't go down very well. Okay, so the same principle would apply, obviously, for Form 9 for GCSE resits, but in terms of Form 8, both sets of SENCOs or equivalent members of staff need to be doing those thorough checks on the Form 8. Okay, next one. Right, so rolling forward the Form 8 for 25% extra time and or a scribe. So the SENCO, or an equivalent member of staff within an FE college, they need to make sure that 25% extra time and or a scribe remains appropriate, practicable and reasonable. So for example, you could have a student who is doing a GCSE maths resit. When you look at the Form 8, the Part 1 is making reference to subjects such as, English language, English literature, geography, history, RS, those sort of subjects where spelling, punctuation, and grammar is being assessed, essay style extended writing questions. And then within part one, it says the student doesn't need extra time for maths and science, well, then you wouldn't be awarding them 25% extra time for GCSE maths resits. But actually, if the student was resitting GCSE English language, and you could see that was the subject that they'd been awarded 25% extra time in previously, it was referenced in part one of Form 8, perhaps not explicitly, but they might have made reference to students' struggles with subjects of extended writing. This is where their learning difficulty has the greatest impact. Then you'd think, yeah, that's fine. I can award 25% extra time for the GCSE English language resits, and also that the candidate continues to meet the current published criteria. Now, there shouldn't be any issues here because we have not made any changes to the criteria for 25% extra time or a scribe. So obviously, there should not be any Form 8s that are coming through to you where the candidate just had one below average standardized score, because that was removed in September 2021. So you should be receiving Form 8s where the candidate in part 2 of Form 8 for 25% extra time has 2 below average standardized scores relating to 2 different areas of speed of working, or 1 below average standardized score and 1 low average standardized score relating to 2 different areas of speed of working. Next slide. Right, so remember, Form 8RF is only completed for AS, A-level and other level 3 qualifications. So for those of you that are FE colleges, you do not need to complete Form 8RF for GCSE resits this November or next summer. You don't need to complete it, okay? What you do there is that you are simply doing that thorough check on Form 8 to ensure that it has been fully completed, signed and dated. So please do not complete Form 8RF for GCSE resits. Like I said earlier, you would be wasting your time, and your time is, precious, valuable. So you only complete Form 8RF where the Form 8 is being rolled forward from level 1, level 2 qualifications to level 3 qualifications, whether that be BTEC nationals, A levels, AS levels, or basically, a WJC level 3 vocational qualification, or AQA applied general qualifications, etc. Right, next slide. Right. So if we've got colleagues here from Wales and Northern Ireland, and I'm assuming, and I suspect I'm totally right, that obviously you will have seen the same issues in Wales and Northern Ireland as in England. And I had somebody tell me last week that the waiting list in their county in England is actually 4 years. I had seen an email in the last academic year where in that particular county it was 3 years, but this person last week told me in their part of England, in their county, it was a 4-year waiting list. So where a candidate has been referred to CAMHS or a local NHS trust, and that could be by their school, college, more likely a school, I guess, or a GP. And what we found was that the referral process did vary across England. So in some cases, it was the school that was required to make the referral to CAMHS or the local NHS trust. In other cases, it was the GP that was making the referrals. It doesn't matter whether it was the school or the GP. Evidently, obviously, that will depend where you are in England. But if the candidate has been referred to CAMHS or a local NHS trust, they are on a list to be screened, and they are likely to receive a formal diagnosis. A Senco may, in exceptional circumstances, use that CAMHS NHS Trust referral confirmation acceptance letter. So what we are trying to do here, obviously, is to make sure, obviously, that a student is not disadvantaged. So you as a school, you know their difficulties. You obviously, if you are living in that part of England where you are required as a school to make the referral to CAMHS or the NHS Trust, very obviously, you have seen those difficulties. You have seen the candidate struggles day in, day out. You've had that information back from teaching staff, support staff. There's obviously been, good, effective liaison with the parent. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that that student is not disadvantaged where the formal diagnosis of ADHD, ASD would actually come after they had sat their GCSE examination. So we are trying obviously to help students, help centres here to ensure that level playing field. However, and as you'll see from the next slide, where you are actually using that referral letter. So next slide, I said, brilliant, thank you. So the Senco must produce a compelling picture of need within part 1 of Form 8. So because you haven't got that formal medical diagnosis from an NHS trust, from an NHS specialist, from CAMHS, you will have to paint a greater picture of need. You'll have to have more substantive comments and observations from teaching staff, support staff. But again, we are trying to help centres here, recognising the length of the waiting lists across the United Kingdom, ensuring that that young person with a potential upcoming diagnosis of ADHD, ASD is not disadvantaged. And as a centre, you have supported that referral, you can paint that picture of need, you can show those substantive comments, observations from teaching staff, support staff. Okay, next slide. Now, a Senco may accept evidence from a specialist working within either the NHS or a private practice. If we had ever written within the JCQ regulations that a Senco could only accept evidence from a specialist working within the NHS, I know full well that the lawyers would certainly have struck that out and said you can't be saying that. So it is for you, as a Senco, equivalent member of staff, you must determine actually, yes, I'm content with this letter that I have received, but that could come from a registrar, a specialist, consultant, specialist nurse working within the NHS, or equally a psychiatrist working within private practice. They are appropriately qualified. That is perfectly acceptable. Okay. But although a specialist, now this actually, I'm not going to say where it came from, but this actually came from a Senco themselves, and they were delighted when I saw them last week that their suggestion had found its way into the JCQ regulations. So again, as I say, never be afraid to drop an email, because this person did actually send me an email, and their suggestion actually has found its way into this year's JCQ regulations. So although a specialist may recommend specific access arrangements, it is the Senco who makes the decision. It is the Senco who determines those arrangements for the candidate's examination. So you may need to have those conversations with a parent where you will say, well, yes, the consultant did recommend 25% extra time, but we actually feel that supervised rest breaks are more appropriate for your child's examinations. So that's obviously what we're trying to do here, because I do think that sometimes, understandably, those in the medical profession may not know the clear distinction between 25% extra time and supervised rest breaks. So a specialist may recommend specific access arrangements, which you as a school may agree with. You can say, yes, I can perfectly understand why they said that, or actually, well, I don't know why that's being recommended, because it's really not going to level the playing field for them. It's not going to give that student effective access to their examinations. And so therefore we feel actually that supervised rest breaks would be better. Okay, so it is the Senco who makes that decision. It is the Senco's professional judgment, which is based on their knowledge of the candidate's needs, their normal way of working, and then what teaching staff, even support staff, may have said. So the Senco is making that holistic judgment. On one hand, they've got that medical diagnosis. That's one slice of the cake. But they've got to make that holistic judgment, which will involve, as I say, liaison with teaching and or support staff, what's being written in school reports, what's the candidate's normal way of working in timed assessment. So obviously we have done this obviously to help you, because obviously sometimes there may be disagreement, but it will help you with support where necessary from a senior leader, just to show a parent or parents actually For all due respect, yes, the specialist may say this, but our professional judgment, and I can explain that rationale to you, is that your son, your daughter will be much better with supervised rest breaks, and that's what we will be putting in place, because we feel that will enable them to access their examinations more effectively. Right, next slide. Right, so where a candidate with an existing Form 9 progresses from GCSE to AS and or A-level qualifications, or indeed other level 3 qualifications, then you must process a new online application for 25% extra time and or a scribe. Okay, same equally would apply to a reader. Okay, so a new Form 9 must be completed, supported by specialist evidence confirming the candidate's disability. And the completion of a new Form 9 applies whether the candidate stays within the same school, so it's an 11 to 18 school, or moves to a different centre for level 3 studies. What you've got to do is you must complete a new Form 9, which is in the context of that candidate's current level 3 studies. So, you wouldn't be producing, a new Form 9 for a level 3 student now unless they were going to be sitting, say, level 3 BTEC examinations in January 2025, and you were starting that process of completing Form 9. For a student who was doing solely A-levels, you'd be completing a new Form 9 later this academic year, so the spring, the summer term of year 12, possibly even the autumn term of year 13. But where a student goes from GCSE to AS, A-level or other level 3 qualifications, you need a new online application for 25% extra time and or a scribe, even a reader, and a new Form 9 must be completed. You don't need updated specialist evidence. The specialist evidence can roll forward. So you don't need to say to the student, to the parent, well, now we need an updated letter from the consultant. Not at all. If you're still seeing those difficulties, that's fine. So the medical evidence can stay. It could be an EHCP that you're using, but it's that Form 9 that must be updated. Okay, next slide. So 25% extra time in art examinations. So we're just clarifying this. I mean, certainly I saw emails around this. This sort of seemed to sort of bubble up a little bit more sort of post-COVID. But what we're just clarifying is that 25% extra time would be awarded in a timed art examination where a candidate has a formally diagnosed medical condition, a physical disability, a visual impairment, and that is having a substantial and adverse effect on their manual dexterity, their physical coordination. So as a centre, as a Senco, supported by comments and observations from the art teacher, you can say very clearly within Part 1 of Form 9 that the candidate is demonstrably slower when mixing paints, painting and or sketching. So as I say, they could have a physical disability. They could, very sadly, and I've seen this, where a student has had a stroke at a very young age, and so their physical coordination, their manual dexterity has been substantially impaired. So we are just giving clarification that 25% extra time can be awarded in a timed art examination. Next one. So you may have, this will be rarer, okay? This will be much more rarer and exceptional. You would typically be finding candidates, as I say, with a medical condition, physical disability, visual impairment. Demonstrably, it's obvious that because of their disability, because of their medical, they are slower, as I say, painting, sketching, mixing paints, using a paintbrush, using a pencil, etc. But you could, in rarer circumstances, have candidates with learning difficulties who may require 25% extra time. So as you can see, as I say, they're substantially slower processing, poor memory skill, but that's going to be rarer. You would be looking, as I say, medical condition, physical disability, visual impairment. Next one. Right, so we're just giving clarification here. So 26 to 50% extra time in a Form 8. That Form 8 cannot roll forward from GCSE to AS, A-level or other level 3 qualifications. So where you believe that the candidate will continue to require up to 50% extra time. And it doesn't need be the full 50% extra time. It could be 30, could be 35, could be 40, could be 45. But a student who needs more than 25% extra time and up to 50%, where they had that at GCSE, the Form 8 cannot roll forward. You must complete a new Form 8, which means that the candidate will have to be reassessed by your school's appointed assessor, and they will have to meet the published criteria once again for more than 25% extra time and up to a maximum of 50%, which means obviously 2 very substantially below average standardized scores, so 69 or less, relating to 2 different areas of speed of working. Next one. So computer, reader. So this will be for a candidate. So we're now saying that this can be for a candidate for whom English is an additional language. So they can be awarded a computer reader. But, and there is a but here, it's like saying, well, a candidate who has learning difficulties can be awarded 25% extra time because they have learning difficulties. And as you will all know, that isn't the case, because obviously the candidate has to meet the published criteria in terms of either 2 below average standardized scores relating to 2 different areas of speed of working, or 1 below average and 1 low average standardized score relating to 2 different areas of speed of working, or 2 low average standardized scores, etc. Okay, so this isn't a blanket, the student has EAL, they can be given a computer reader. Okay, next one. So really what this is, and I met a group of Sencos last autumn in a London borough, quite a diverse London borough on the whole. And I said to them, if we were to allow a computer reader in examinations, do you think that would be fair? Would it benefit your EAL students? And they would have quite a, in them, probably right across that borough, they would have quite a block of students for whom English is an additional language. And what they said to me to help you sort of digest this, interpret this, is that they said, yes, there would be students, if you gave them a bilingual dictionary, they would really struggle flipping between the question paper and the bilingual dictionary, trying to find the words. Even where they meet the published criteria for 25% extra time. So a bilingual dictionary with 25% extra time, they would still struggle flipping between the question paper and the bilingual dictionary, looking up the word, trying to actually absorb its meaning. And they said that for some students, because their reading difficulties are so significant, they were more reliant on actually someone reading the words to them, and actually hearing those words being read out aloud to them was far better than actually using a bilingual dictionary or a bilingual dictionary with 25% extra time. So it is there, okay? You may have students for whom English is an additional language, and they're fine with an examination reading pen, which is a centre delegated access arrangement. Don't need an online application, don't need to complete Form 9, okay? So some students may be quite okay using an examination reading pen. Others might be fine using a bilingual dictionary. Others, where they meet the published criteria, will be fine with a bilingual dictionary with 25% extra time. But there may be some students in your school, college, where you believe as a Senco that there is a genuine need for a computer reader due to that candidate's poor reading skills. Their reading abilities, are really poor. They have got significant, persistent reading difficulties, and a reader would really help them to actually access that examination. And if you look in the JCQ regulations, section 5.5 in the examples, there's a good example there of a computer reader for a student from the Ukraine. So have a look at that, because that gives you a good example of the type of student that we have in mind. It's highlighted in yellow, and one stakeholder that I work closely with, like I work closely with Rebecca. So one stakeholder actually sort of gave me an example which I played with. So together we wrote that example, and as I say, do have a look at that, and that will give you an idea of the type of candidate that we have in mind for whom English is an additional language, who needed, in this case, we did it as a computer reader. Okay, next one. Right, so alternative site arrangements. So this is basically where the candidate needs to sit their examinations at home or at a hospital, which is a non-registered centre. So the candidate might have a serious medical condition, or in a hospital, it's not a registered examination centre, or they might have a mental health condition and they need to sit their examinations at home. So there is no need for written evidence, okay? The Senco or the relevant member of the senior leadership team decides. So like before, right at the very beginning, you decide. Okay, now I did have in the summer, in the run up to the exams in May and June, people sending emails saying, oh, can the candidates sit their exams at home? And I had to say, it's your professional judgment. You must decide that. So you as a centre believe the candidate cannot be accommodated within the main examination hall. They cannot be accommodated as part of a smaller group with similar needs. They cannot be accommodated on a one-to-one basis. So those three forms of invigilation or rooming within the school or college on site have been ruled out. They do need to sit their examinations at home because of the severity of their condition. But as it says there, the person holding that little text box, you decide, okay? Nobody's going to judge you on it. It's your professional decision. Right, next one. So we've got two centre delegated access arrangements, so non-electronic headphones. So these would be headphones that are not connected to Bluetooth. They are not connected to, they're not Wi-Fi enabled, okay? So obviously post-COVID, and this obviously would have been 22, 23, that's when we introduced ear defenders. We introduced fidget toys, we introduced stress balls. So you've got non-electronic headphones. So then they have no connectivity to Bluetooth. They couldn't connect with any other device. They don't need a Wi-Fi connection. And then also a timer on a candidate's desk. So a small countdown clock, small analog clock, a digital timer. Now, previously, if you take the last one, so you had a student, let's say, with a visual impairment, they couldn't see the clocks in the main examination room, and they had a small timer on their desk. Previously, you'd have had to process an online application for other. That would have been not approved. You would then have to refer it to the relevant awarding bodies and wait for them to make a decision. You'd have had to produce a file note to say why you believe the candidate needs a timer on their desk, what's the nature of their disability difficulty, this is their normal way of working, etc. So we've swept that away. It's your professional judgment. If you've got candidates with a visual impairment, if you've got candidates with a learning difficulty who would struggle to read a clock in the main examination room, you have a candidate with genuine time management difficulties. I know sometimes candidates have clocks with coloured segments. That's absolutely fine. It's your professional judgment. And obviously that candidate would have a timer on their desk because that is a way of enabling them to access the examination to demonstrate their skills, their knowledge and understanding to the best of their ability. Okay, next one. Right, so alternative rooming arrangements. So this one actually came from a centre and they just wanted this put into the JCQ regulations. So one-to-one invigilation and the use of an alternative room. So that would apply where the candidate has a serious medical condition, so frequent seizures, Tourette's, or they've got significant behavioural issues which would disturb other candidates in the room. So really, this is the arrangement of the last resort on site, as I mentioned. So the candidate cannot be accommodated, seated more appropriately within the main examination room. You can't put that candidate in there. So for example, with a serious medical condition, you just think they can't be in that room with 269 other students because then, if they had a serious medical episode, you might have to have, first aid staff initially, then perhaps paramedic, ambulance crew, etc. So it's just not, it's too much of a risk to have them in the main examination hall, and that potential disruption that could be caused to others. And then your exams officer will be going down the road of special consideration, a big group application. Equally, even if you put them in a smaller room, there is still that risk of disruption, or indeed with behavioural issues, they would even, disturb others in a room where you've got, say, 8 students or 15 students as opposed to 270. So we're just saying that one-to-one invigilation and the use of an alternative room is going to be exceptional, serious medical condition, significant behavioural issues. Okay, that's an alternative rooming arrangement and a reminder there. Next slide. So bilingual dictionary with 25% extra time. So form BD 25% has now been withdrawn. So what we actually found was that form BD 25% actually duplicated the approval sheet from Access Arrangements online. So we felt it was silly keeping that form. It was just a burden for you having to complete it when you were answering the same questions online. So moving forward, where a GCSE student requires a bilingual dictionary with 25% extra time, the only evidence that you require for inspection purposes is the approval sheet from AAO. So it would be the approval sheet from AAO and the signed candidate personal data consent form. That's all you need. Okay, we've never required Form 8 for that, never required Form 9. Okay, it's now moving forward, just the approval sheet. So nice and simple. But of course, you'd have to be satisfied that the candidate does meet the criteria for that arrangement, and in particular, meets all of the criteria which is set out in paragraph 5.18.6 of the JCQ regulations. Next one. Right, so here, where a candidate with English as an additional language does not use a bilingual dictionary, but they will require 25% extra time and or a scribe, then the Senco does need to demonstrate an underlying difficulty using Form 8. So if I take that one first, you believe that the candidate has an underlying learning difficulty in their first language. Now, sometimes, and I have seen it, where centres have said, we've been provided with a diagnosis of dyslexia from their first country, or their country of origin. That's absolutely fine, because that can be referenced within part 1 of Form 8. So you actually know they do have a learning difficulty because it's been diagnosed. So you can then sort of almost be business as usual in terms of the completion of part 1 of Form 8, and then obviously assess the candidate part 2, part 3. But where you haven't got any formal diagnosis of a learning difficulty, it is your hunch, shall I say, it's your sort of professional judgment that you think this is a student who isn't just struggling to learn the English language. This isn't a case of English being an additional language. This is going deeper than that. Then that's basically when you will need to produce that compelling picture of need within part 1 of Form 8. So you'd need to set out why you believe that student has an underlying learning difficulty in their first language, why this isn't a student who is simply struggling to learn the English language, why this isn't just a student for whom English is an additional language. And you would there, be having substantive comments from teaching staff, support staff, referencing within part 1 of Form 8, screening test results, pupil attainment data, pupil tracking data, information in school reports. So you'd be able to justify, as the Senco or an equivalent member of staff within a college, you would be able to justify to a JCQ centre inspector your rationale why you believe that student has an underlying learning difficulty in their first language. If they had an other substantial impairment, then you obviously would be using Form 9 before processing an online application. Next slide. Okay, so last year, I think there were people, because remote invigilation was new, I think there were people who were confusing remote invigilation with an alternative site arrangement, and they are not the same. So as you've already seen, and I guess most of you will know, obviously, that an alternative site arrangement is where the invigilator is taking a question paper and any other confidential assessment material in a sealed, non-transparent envelope, or it could be a transit bag, it's zipped, it's sealed, and they are taking that to the candidate's home, to the candidate's hospital, could be, children's home, etc. So they are conducting the examination in person, albeit away from the school. Remote invigilation involves the use of technology. So Microsoft Teams or Zoom, it is a very rare arrangement. I think probably because of the complications around, the use of IT from both ends, the school's end and obviously the students. So I think I'm right in saying it was certainly, no more than 2 hands at the maximum across the awarding bodies for those students who had remote invigilation last summer. But it is, as I say, is not the same as an alternative site, 2 separate arrangements. So alternative site, that's detailed obviously in 516 of the JCQ, sorry, 515 of the JCQ regulations, and remote invigilation is section 520 of the JCQ regulations. So we just clarified that this year. Okay, next one. So remote invigilation, we've also provided guidance for centres on remote invigilation. So if you think, having read the JCQ regulations, that might work for that particular student, then obviously we have produced guidance on that arrangement, and there's a web link for that particular document. So it can be found on the JCQ website. Next one. So last year, obviously, we introduced a timetable variation for a candidate with a disability requiring overnight supervision. And a bit like when I said earlier that I think we were all taken by surprise, taken aback by the number of students with learning difficulties requiring 25% extra time and supervised rest breaks. What we actually found, and when I spoke to one of my awarding body colleagues, they looked into it, and what we actually found was that there were more students requiring a timetable variation on the day of the exam rather than actually transferring an examination from the published afternoon session to the following morning. So we fixed that, but this is new. So this is where you've got a candidate with a disability and they need to sit exams scheduled for the morning session later that morning, or they need to sit examinations scheduled for the morning session in the afternoon, or vice versa. They need to sit exams scheduled for the afternoon session in the morning. This is where obviously you are moving the examination on the published day. It's either being sat later that morning, the morning exam is being sat in the afternoon, or the afternoon exam is being sat in the morning. Okay, next slide. So this will be a candidate, they've got a diagnosed medical condition, they could have a physical disability, or they could have social, emotional, mental health needs, a visual impairment. I suspect you will find students predominantly in those first 3 categories. So a medical condition, a physical disability, social, emotional, and mental health needs. Less likely a visual impairment, but I do know obviously that the awarding bodies received applications for that last summer. When I say last summer, obviously summer 2024 just gone, through the other route. Okay, but I suspect you'd be looking at students in those first 3 categories, those first 3 bullet points. Next one. So the Senco must complete Form 9. Okay, so you process an online application using AAO, and you must have formal evidence of that candidate's disability, of that impairment. If you answer the questions correctly, if the candidate meets the criteria, it will be automatically approved. So there is no awarding body referral process here. So they meet the criteria. You say yes to the right questions, it will be approved, and further information can be found within section 522 of the JCQ regulations. Next slide. So listening to music, white noise due to a substantial impairment. So this was another that sort of emerged sort of post-COVID. I can't recall many pre-COVID, but it was something that seemed to grow sort of post-COVID. And previously, we would be saying to centres, right, you need to process an online application for other. That would be automatically not approved, it would then have to be referred to the awarding body. You'd be uploading a file note and evidence of, for example, their mental health condition or their sensory impairments, and going through the awarding body referral process. So we have obviously formalised this with a formal process through Access Arrangements Online. So this will be a candidate with social, emotional and mental health needs, or they've got a sensory impairment such as tinnitus. So next slide. So the Senco again must complete Form 9. So it is within Part 1 of Form 9. And if that was the only arrangement that the student needed, you'd only need to fill in that part of Form 9. You just get jumped straight to listening to music, white noise due to a substantial impairment. So the Senco would complete Part 1 of Form 9. Just that particular section, complete Part 2, Part 3, online application, process using AAO, and then you'd have the formal evidence to confirm their sensory impairment, their mental health condition, medical condition, etc. Okay, so we have formalized that now. It does exist as an access arrangement reasonable adjustment. Next one. Right, so listening to music, white noise. So here, obviously, as a centre, you must make sure that the candidate uses a device which cannot be connected to the internet. And you must obviously ensure, we must check the playlist to ensure that an advantage is not conferred to the candidate. So one centre said to me, I think they were going to be having an A-level student next summer, where there were some 3-hour A-level examinations. And what they said to me was that they would put tracks together, but the student would have to listen to the same tracks over and over again during that 3-hour duration. So it may be easier for you, basically, rather than the student actually bringing in tracks and you've got to check them all. Actually, that's done up front, and obviously you'll have to determine who's going to be doing that within your centre. But if the student said, well, I like to listen to classical music, well, that's fine, because you haven't got to worry about the lyrics there. If they said, you know, well, I like to listen to, I did have one inspector that said that when he went to visit a centre, the student was obviously was in the days of other. The student was listening to heavy metal. So, you know, you might want to put a playlist together of heavy metal, but you would need to check those lyrics. You could have another student who actually says, I'd like to listen to 1970s disco music. So you'd have to put tracks together there where you felt that they would not advantage the candidate. And perhaps actually, you know, just do select few tracks, and they would have to listen to them over and over again. But they'll say the key takeaways there obviously are that the student uses a device which cannot be connected to the internet, and the music playlist must be checked to ensure that an advantage is not being conferred to the candidate. And you'll find information on that within section 523 of the JCQ regulations. Next slide. So computer-based assessment tools. So we're just saying here that where a computer-based assessment tool is used to gather assessment evidence to aid with the completion of Part 2 of Form 8, so that assessment evidence is being recorded within Part 2 of Form 8, you do need a suitably qualified assessor. They need to be present to oversee the test's computerized administration. They need to be actively observing the candidate and monitoring their engagement with the assessment. So obviously, we're just giving a nod there to computer-based assessment, but just reminding you that you do need a qualified assessor present during the test to oversee the test's administration, to observe the candidate or candidates, and you are monitoring their engagement with that computer-based assessment. Right, next slide. Right, so Form 9 and GCSE Resit. So again, I hope this will help those of you in listening tonight in the FE sector. So where a candidate resits GCSE examinations in November 2024 or June 2025 to improve upon a previous grade, the Senco or an equivalent member of staff within an FE college may use an existing Form 9 from the candidate's previous centre. So the Form 9 can roll forward from one centre to another for GCSE resits. If you had a student, they weren't resitting GCSE, but they were going to be doing, let's say, are moving from GCSE to a level 2 BTEC Tech Award, or they were going to be doing a BTEC first, and I think they're level 1, level 2, then that's equally absolutely fine because the student is staying at the same level, level 1, level 2. So you could roll the Form 9 forward where that student is doing a level 1, level 2 vocational qualification, which is covered by the JCQ regulations. Okay, so again, I'm hoping that that will help our colleagues in the FE sector. So schools listening tonight, please make sure that you do forward on the Form 9 for students who are going to be resitting GCSE, English language and/or maths this November or next summer. Okay, next one. Right, so obviously the Form 9 must be supported by specialist evidence confirming the candidate's disability. So EHCP, letter from an eye consultant, letter from a qualified teacher of the visually impaired, letter from a hospital consultant, I could go on. And the student must sign a new candidate personal data consent form before a new online application is processed. Remembering, though, what I said earlier, that specialist evidence is not required for a computer reader or supervised rest breaks. You just need the Form 9. And also, of course, that you do not need an online application, and you do not, by extension, you do not need the candidate to sign a personal data consent form for supervised rest breaks or indeed any other centre delegated access arrangement. So no centre delegated access arrangement requires the candidate signing a personal data consent form because nothing is being recorded against their name. Their personal data is not being processed online. So you don't need an online application or a signed candidate personal data consent form for supervised rest breaks. But just as a reminder, more generally, you do not need a candidate personal data consent form for any other centre delegated access arrangement, such as an examination reading pen, bilingual dictionary, coloured overlay, question papers on coloured paper, word processor with the spelling and grammar check switched off. And as I mentioned earlier, equally, you would not need any centre-based evidence for any of those. It is purely and solely the Senco's professional judgment, their decision. Next one. So on the JCQ website, there are some useful infographics. Now, this is completely true. I met a Senco last Wednesday, and she came up to me and she said that she liked the JCQ regulations, which she described. And when she said this to me, I said to her, I will be using this now, what you've just said to me. So she described the new style JCQ regulations as wicked. That's what she told me. They're wicked. But she also liked the infographics. She thought they were really helpful. So we have got infographics for 25% extra time, 26% to 50% extra time, computer, reader, and scribe. So the top 4 access arrangements within the online system that are processed. Obviously, number 1, 25% extra time. Number 2, computer, reader. Number 3, scribe. And then number 4, 26 to 50% extra time. But you will find useful infographics which may help you on the JCQ website. Next one. And then obviously earlier this year, we produced an information sheet for centres to use with parents. That is in PDF format. And it's also in a Word version, so you can change that to suit your local circumstances. Okay, so you may think, actually, I'm not going to use the PDF version. I think if we have the Word version, we can tailor that to our particular needs. So you may have had particular scenarios and you just want to play with that sheet because you feel that your experiences, your lessons learnt, whatever, how you want to describe that, you just want to make some tweaks, some changes to the wording, that's absolutely fine. So there's a PDF version, but there is also an editable Word version, which you can use as a Senco. And then obviously we have also produced new for this year guidance regarding parental candidate requests for access arrangements where the centre has no evidence of need. And again, that may help you in conversations with parents or the candidate where you can't support the access arrangement, as we said earlier, where there's no picture of need. The published criteria will not be met. So there's further guidance around that, as well as that strengthening I said earlier about not processing an online application. And the next slide. So obviously that's where all those documents can be found on the JCQ website. That's the web link. Okay, so there you'll find those 4 infographics. You'll also find there an overview of the evidence requirements for access arrangements. You might find that helpful, as well as obviously that parental guidance material, which again you might find helpful, as well as your senior leaders. But do obviously use those resources, particularly the infographics, because where people have seen them, they really do like them, and obviously they supplement obviously the new style JCQ regulations for this academic year. And the next one. And so this is obviously the final one from me. So I would like to say thank you to you all tonight for actually spending part of your Monday evening listening to me. So that's much appreciated. I hope you found it useful and informative. But also, I would like to thank every single one of you tonight, whether you're a Senco, whether you're an assistant Senco, a deputy Senco, an access arrangements coordinator, part of an additional learning needs, a learning support team in an FE college or a sixth form college or a PRU. It's not easy. I do appreciate that, but I would like to thank every single one of you for your dedication, for your hard work, because without you, students would not be getting those grades in August and progressing on to further education, higher education, or the world of work. So thank you ever so much to all of you. I hope you have a good year ahead. I hope you find those changes we've made this year really helpful. And as I used to say up north in the Northern Soul Clubs, don't forget, keep the faith.
What a lovely way to finish. Thank you, Nick. And I see you're getting loads of love and celebrating emojis and thumbs up, which is really lovely. And that's testament to all the work that you do too. So thank you very much. But you're not off the hook yet. So we have loads of questions now that I am going to put to you. Now, some questions actually came in beforehand, so there was an opportunity for people to send in questions before. So I'm actually going to start with those questions, if you don't mind, because they did come yesterday.
Yeah, sure.
So the first question actually comes in from a parent, and she or he has asked, I'm the parent of an autistic boy who can no longer attend his grammar school because of medical needs and trauma. He can't leave the safety of his home for any reason, but he's still eagerly learning his GCSEs independently. He's been taken off the roll now at school and he's being supported by the local authority funding. He does have an EHCP. He's not a home educated pupil because the local authority are still responsible for his education. So the question kind of is coming, his normal way of working is at home and he does need access arrangements to do his exams at home, but he doesn't have an exam centre. He lives too far from private exam centres. Have you experienced this before, Nick? And do you have any options or solutions that this parent can try? Because they say the local authority doesn't seem to be too interested, they say, in exploring it.
So unfortunately with that one, Rebecca, I mean, the young person, would need to be entered through a registered examination centre, I'm afraid. So that would be, a registered examination centre who is willing to accept private candidates, because obviously he wouldn't be obviously on that centre's roll. So you'd have to find a centre who is willing to accept private candidates. And if such a centre can be found, would then be having a conversation with the Senco and or a relevant member of the senior leadership team to explain his needs and the access arrangements that would be needed. And if you can find a centre that is willing to accept private candidates, and I would suggest having that conversation as soon as possible in terms of possible access arrangement. But unfortunately, it would have to be a registered examination centre who is willing to enter him for examinations. They are willing to accept private candidates.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, hopefully that helps. Here's another one. And we have, what time is it? We have 25 minutes, hopefully, to get through as many of these questions as we can. For everybody here, if we don't get to your question, myself and Nick, we do it every year, but we will take the time afterwards to go through and answer everybody's question afterwards. And we record a separate kind of Q&A session between ourselves. But the next question, If a student is visually impaired, Nick, and their normal way of working is for the teaching assistant to move the protractor as directed by the student, and then the teaching assistant tells the student the reading bits that they're unable to see, is that allowed in an exam?
Right, so the simple answer to that one, Rebecca, is that the person who's asked that question, they would need to process an online application for a practical assistant. That will be automatically not approved and would then need to be referred to the relevant awarding body, or probably would be awarding body, I'm guessing, just the one. Obviously, practical assistant isn't covered by Form 9. So the Senco or an equivalent member of staff, they would have to write a short file note confirming the candidate's disability, and then basically how the practical assistant would be helping the candidate in the examination, and that would then be for the awarding body to make the decision. And
Okay. And it's okay for them to read it, Nick, to read the protractor reading if the student can't read it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that just needs to be sort of reinforced as part of the file notes of the awarding body, that that's what the practical assistant would be doing, and explaining obviously the candidate's visual impairment.
Yeah, it's a visual impairment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. For students with medical needs like sickle cell or severe arthritis, does the student still need to be assessed for additional time? I mean,
No,
that's
no.
a no.
No, that's basically Form 9 with evidence of the medical condition. So no Form 8 because it's not learning difficulty.
Perfect. And somebody about the Bluetooth headphones that you were talking about, they asked, what about Bluetooth hearing aids in exams?
Yes, they are allowed. I think what I would suggest there, because I do remember the answer, I can't recall it on top of my head. I would contact BATOD, and that's the British Association of Teachers of the Deaf, and they would be able to help you on that one. They mustn't take the hearing aid out because that will really disadvantage the young person. So it's something that I'm trying to remember. I can't now. It's something to do with obviously like switching the sort of the hearing aid it might be to flight mode. But if you check, if you speak with BATOD, they will be able to advise. But please do not tell that young person, that candidate, to remove those hearing aids. That really is a no-no, because it's not going to help them. It will stress them.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone's asking about the new Form 8. They've said, is it possible for the cut and paste function in the PDF version of the Form 8 to be extended to cover all the lines of one box? Because at the moment, each test has to be copied in line by line, which is really time consuming. And they said in the Word version, it was easier because they could just import all the test information.
I think if that one, Becca, if either you send that to me separately or the person emails me, I'll deal with that one separately, I think.
Perfect. We'll do that. Let me go back now so it's fair. So we go back up the top and answer them in order, because there's actually a few questions about home education. So somebody's asked, we work with home educated children and they've smaller numbers. Oh, this is about Swift. Smaller numbers than a school. Is there an option to purchase Swift assessments per child? In short, yes. You can contact us, Gavin, about that. Somebody else asked about home. I'll just go through them in order, Nick. It's easier.
Sure, yeah.
Can a parent access the JCQ regulations when their child's education is through EOTAS, the local authority funding?
I mean, there's no restriction on a parent, reading the JCQ regulations. They're not intended for parents, and obviously, I'm afraid the JCQ cannot address queries from parents. But obviously, if if that student is if a student is home educated, then obviously, again, like my first comment, of the first step is to try and find a centre that accepts private candidates, and then obviously have a conversation with the Senco and or a senior leader as to the private candidate's needs, the possible access arrangements.
Thank you. But you can read them all freely as a parent. So
yes, that's what I mean. They're on the JCQ website, absolutely.
They're there.
Yeah.
There's nothing secret. Where a student has limited English and an SEN, for example, a processing difficulty and the use of an electronic dictionary, like a lingo pen, That's become normal way of working for them. So can they provide that as a non-access arrangement? I assume they mean center delegated arrangement.
So I don't think a lingo pen is allowed. So basically, we only allow an examination reading pen. So you'd need to be looking at section 5.6 of the JCQ regulations. And what we say there is that the examination reading pen cannot have, an inbuilt dictionary, thesaurus, cannot have, a data storage facility. And what you can't do, obviously, is use an examination reading pen, which is reading text printed in English in the candidate's first language, because then that is effectively acting as a translator, which we do not allow. So an examiner, if say the student's first language is Polish, they cannot be using a reading pen set to Polish to read text printed in English. It would have to be an examination reading pen reading or scanning text in English, reading it in English. That makes sense, Rebecca?
Yeah, it does
Yeah.
make sense. Well, it
Good,
makes sense
good.
to me anyway.
Yeah.
Rachel wants just confirmation. If a candidate only needs a rest break, a supervised rest break, and no extra time, does she fill in part 1 of the Form 8?
No. So if basically a student only needs supervised rest breaks, irrespective whether they've got learning difficulties or not, it is Form 9 and it's part 1 and part 3 of Form 9. So where a student only needs supervised rest breaks, it's just Form 9.
There you go, Rachel, and everybody else. Okay, a few people have asked me questions and sent me privately, and it's popped up here. So I'm just going to answer it about 2 things. Number 1, certificate numbers, and number 2, the SWIFT. So I'll give you a break for a second, Nick. SWIFT qualifications. People are asking me, do you need to be qualified, or what qualifications do you need for the SWIFT, which is the assessment that I was talking about earlier? You just need to be, well, 2 things. A teacher can administer the SWIFT. You can administer it in groups. But as Nick pointed out there, I think towards the end of the presentation, if you want to use scores for a student on the Form 8, you have to be a qualified access arrangements assessor holding your level 7 or equivalent qualification in access arrangements and testing. So that goes, somebody else asked me, is the SWIFT replacing assessors? Absolutely not. No, unfortunately, we don't have computers that are going to take over from us humans. We still need our own, we need to do professional judgment. At the end of the day, the SWIFT is there to try and streamline assessment and to help the assessor rather than replace them. Somebody is asking me about certificate numbers. If they didn't have a certificate number, what do they do? I suggest you get back onto your original awarding body and ask for a certificate number. I know people that qualified through AIRM a number of years ago who don't have certificate numbers. You can contact us in Education Elephant and we'll give you a certificate number for your placement on your Form 8.
Just to
So
say,
hopefully
yeah, just follow on from that one, Rebecca. So I know that for some providers in England, I think there's a couple of universities, so they didn't issue certificate numbers. So what I've said to those people, obviously ERM is slightly different, but what I've said to them is that they would need to record that within part 2 of Form 8 other relevant information and just say that although I can confirm that something along the lines of I can confirm that my qualification is a postgraduate qualification in individual specialist assessment at or equivalent to level 7. It continues to meet the requirements set out within Chapter 7 of the JCQ regulations, but at the time of being awarded the qualification, certificate numbers were not issued. So and I do know I've had a couple of assessors where their university definitely didn't and can't give a certificate number, and they just need to record that within part 2 of Form 8 other relevant information. That will be fine for the inspector.
Oh, that's perfect. It takes a bit of stress out of it for
Absolutely.
people who don't have certificate numbers. Somebody asking about an exam reading pen and extra time. Somebody has a student who uses a reader pen. She has a co-occurring special educational need, including dyspraxia and a mild cognitive impairment. She doesn't meet the threshold for extra time, but the Senco says she can see it takes her additional time to use the exam pen, both to scan with it and to read and review the information. So Nick, can you clarify if the person can apply for extra time just to help her manage the use of the technology?
No, so you can't apply for extra time to manage the use of an examination reading pen. So either basically the student has learning difficulties and meets the published criteria in terms of the standardized score, which by the sounds of it isn't going to work, or basically that student would have a physical disability or a medical condition which um, affects their speed of working. That makes sense. So you can't do it, you can't apply per se, or they need more time to use the reading pen. You've got to, you've either got to have learning difficulties and you're going down the Form 8 route, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 with standardized scores, or you've got evidence of a formally diagnosed medical condition, physical disability, and you're setting out the rationale for 25% extra time that way on the basis, a bit like the art exam where we were saying about the manual dexterity, physical coordination, etc.
So she did say they had dyspraxia, so maybe you can
Yeah.
explore that a little bit. I'm not too sure the background information, but there could be something there for you. Somebody has asked, just I suppose, for a little bit of guidance on the process. They've said, with supervised rest breaks, as the Senco, can you still request evidence to support the decision making around allocating rest breaks?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's down to you as a Senko. I mean, you do not require, evidence to present to a JCQ center inspector, but if you internally want, I hope I'm answering that correctly, Rebecca. If you
Mm,
know,
you are.
if you internally want specialist evidence to be supplied by a parent, you're requesting the parent to give you a letter from a consultant because you believe that that will perhaps influence your decision as to whether the arrangement is or not required. That's entirely your prerogative. But as I say, for inspection purposes, all a JCQ centre inspector will want to see is a Form 9 where the need has been recorded within Part 1. And if it's just supervised rest breaks, it'll be just be Part 1 and Part 3 of Form 9. That's all they'll want to see.
Yeah, perfect. But for your
Yeah.
professional decision, you do obviously have to have some sort of evidence to
Yeah,
support
I
the
mean,
decision. Otherwise, you'll be giving them out willy-nilly to
yeah.
everybody.
So there's
Um,
exactly this. You got it. I mean, you probably will in the vast majority of cases know the student does have that disability, that impairment. But if there's like borderline cases, you absolutely, Rebecca, yeah, it will help the Senko in their decision making.
yeah. So Trisha wants to ask, can the Form 9 roll forward?
No, so I think as I mentioned in my presentation, the Form 9 can only roll forward where the student is resitting GCSE qualifications or where they've moved from GCSE to a level 1, level 2 vocational technical VTQ qualification, vocational qualification, where you've got a student who's going from GCSE to A level or GCSE to a level 3 vocational qualification, which is covered by the JCQ regulations, and a Form 9 cannot roll forward. You need to produce a new Form 9 in light of their current level 3 studies.
Super, you got a thumbs up for that one. Thank you. Someone has asked, all of their pupils in their school have an EHCP. Can they use the Form 9 for 25% extra time, a reader and a scribe?
Yes, because they've got an EHCP, you'd be using Form 9 to recall 25% extra time, a reader and a scribe. Yeah, all on one form. Yeah, and Form 9.
Perfect. Does a new centre need to see an assessor's qualification certificate, or can they work away without it?
No, so basically either you would require the assessor to providing you with a copy of their certificate, or basically you would be able to access a database. So where the person has, for example, say it says that they have an APC, you're able to log onto the SAS website and see that they still have a current valid up-to-date APC, or where that person is saying that they are a psychologist registered with the HCPC, they are indeed registered with the HCPC. So you can't just accept that this person, for example, says they have, the PAPA qualification, the AAA, blah, de blah, this postgraduate qualification from X university. you've got to physically make sure that you have seen evidence of that, because that's what an inspector will be asked to be seeing.
Thanks, Nick. This one, a pupil is seeing a consultant for medical condition, well, I can't even pronounce it, orthostatic tachycardia syndrome on the 10th of October. Their modules are in November, and they've had new presentation of their medical symptoms over the summer. Now, can 25% be awarded with only a very short time to establish normal way of working?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that particular one, Rebecca, I think you need to, the person who's asked that question, you need to be satisfied that supervised rest breaks aren't appropriate. Because if the student's got a medical condition, supervised rest breaks may actually be far more appropriate than 25% extra time. So you need to be satisfied that 25% extra time really is required and not supervised rest breaks. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if it is your professional judgment that 25% extra time is going to be needed for, I'm guessing it's a centre in Northern Ireland for GCSE units in November, then obviously you just try and complete part 1 of Form 9 to the best of your ability.
Okay, so the short answer, Brona, is yes, once you've exhausted the use of supervised rest breaks, right?
Yeah.
Somebody had a student who suffered with PTSD around the summer exams because of trauma. The Senco said unlimited supervised rest breaks were needed. They said, as an exams officer, they didn't feel that was appropriate. Can you just confirm that it's okay to say no, even if the Senco says that it's necessary?
Yes, I mean, your Senco obviously needs to be aware of the published JCQ regulations, where we say that a student cannot be given as many supervised rest breaks for as long as they like. So obviously in that particular scenario, your Senco needs to be aware of it. And as an exams officer, you might want to raise that with your relevant senior leader who has line management responsibility for exams, so that he or she can also just make sure the Senco is aware of that published regulations, that they've got to be stipulating supervised rest breaks. So actually saying to you as the exams officer, and you can then inform your invigilation team that the candidate, needs X number of supervised rest breaks for Y minutes, but it can't be unlimited. Because I think at the end of the day, obviously, the student does obviously need to be medically fit to be sitting examinations.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Where a Form 8 can be used for resit, GCSE resits in November, and the student doesn't resit in November, but they're going to in June. Their normal way of working, though, might have changed during the year, and therefore the Form 8 is not appropriate, or it's not an accurate picture of their need anymore. What would you advise? Carol has asked.
But if you feel that basically their needs have changed and that you've cannot use that roll forward Form 8, or if they're doing GCSE resits, and you feel that actually that is no longer an accurate, up-to-date picture of need and normal way of working, then I'm afraid you're going to have to go down the road of a new Form 8, and that means obviously reassessing the student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Subtests in the Swift were reading fluency, spelling, maths fluency, processing speed, and working memory. So 5 different tests somebody has asked. Okay, this one is about, I suppose, the waiting lists you have talked about a little bit, or about, well, I'll read it to you. We've had some letters coming through confirming diagnoses from the Pediatric Autism Service. They're signed by a clinical nurse specialist working within the service. Is that acceptable? It's not about a waiting list, sorry.
No, I mean, that's entirely down to you as a Senco. So you have to make the judgment on that. So if you have a letter from a specialist, so again, Rebecca, specialist clinical
nurse, yeah.
Yeah. And that's come on NHS headed paper. And basically you were aware of that student being referred. You believe that that is an accurate diagnosis. You think, yes, that does confirm our suspicions. That's your professional judgment. So I can't give you a definitive answer. You need to, you are content. You would be satisfied to present that letter to a JCQ centre inspector, and you could justify to him or her your reasoning for using it.
Perfect. So yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Two quick questions. Is there any guidance on for invigilators on what's acceptable practice during a supervised rest break? Do you have guidance?
We don't know. So, I mean, it will vary from student to student. So, you might have a student that actually needs to go outside, get some fresh air. You may have another student who actually goes to a small holding area where they just sit for the duration of the supervised rest break. Another student may sit in the exam room, so their question paper answer booklet will be taken away from them. Like, it's very much, what is their normal way of working for, I think that's what the question is. It's very much their normal way of working for timed internal school tests, mock examinations.
Perfect. And I guess the one thing they can't do is they have to make sure the student doesn't have access to the
Right.
exam paper. I guess that's one of the main things for
Exactly.
guidance.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Rebecca. It is a supervised rest break, which means they are having a break from that examination, and also that the invigilator, doesn't sort of start saying to them, "Oh, how have you done? How do you think the exam's going? Have all the questions that you were expected, have they come up?" They can't discuss the content of the paper with them at all.
Perfect. What about exam cover sheets for scribes, practical assistants, language modifiers? Have there been any changes, Nick?
No, we haven't made any
No.
changes to those.
Okay,
No.
good. Um, Somebody says, what about functional skills, entry-level arrangements, and applications for those? Any changes?
So the functional skills qualifications, as I mentioned, so for AQA and Pearson, functional skills qualifications, so that would be obviously their level 1 and level 2 qualifications. They're now covered by access arrangements online and the JCQ regulations.
Perfect. Somebody has said their centre has sites located at different addresses. Do they need to be submitted as alternative sites? Same centre, different addresses.
So basically, if they are not both registered centres, so if you've got you got sort of site A, which is a registered examination centre, which has a registered centre number, and that's basically where question papers are delivered. That's the centre number under which entries and results, entries and process results are issued, etc. And the other site doesn't have a centre number, then that would be an alternative site arrangement, Rebecca. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And somebody's asking about a scribe. If somebody has an EHCP and they want to apply for a scribe, do they need scores?
No, 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 not at all. So, again, this is obviously important, obviously, why now we really are stressing, obviously, that, people familiarize themselves with the JCQ regulations. But no, if you've got an EHCP, you've got a medical condition, physical disability, sensory impairment, formally diagnosed mental health condition, you do not, or a statement of special educational needs from Northern Ireland, you do not need a Form 8 for 25% extra time, or a scribe, it is Form 9.
Perfect. That's what I thought. And I wrote that to somebody earlier on, but then somebody questioned it. I thought, oh my goodness, maybe they're right. A student with a medical disability will need to complete their art exam in smaller chunks on multiple days. Do they need to complete a form for them to do this? Is it classed as a timetable variation, or where do they
I
go?
think that I would seek clarification on the awarding from the relevant awarding body on that one, if they require any sort of, whether they require any paperwork for the arrangements for that individual student's timed art examination. So I would just clarify that with the awarding body.
Good advice. Yeah. Any guidance for exam clashes which cause centres capacity issues because of the number of candidates requiring an access arrangement?
I mean, I think the bottom, bottom line is, you're just going to have to sort of plan up front to make sure, obviously, and liaise with your senior leadership team to try and obviously make sure that you do have sufficient rooms and sufficient invigilators at your disposal. I think that's the only thing I can say on that one. I think obviously, I think that one, Rebecca, isn't it, is the actual sort of size of the cohorts being
Yeah.
entered for examinations and the size of those cohorts with a high percentage of access arrangements. So it's just basically sort of making sure that you get the support from your senior leadership team in the terms of the allocation of rooms, sufficient invigilators, sufficient readers and scribes. Possibly you may need to look at, an alternative site arrangement.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, I'm conscious of the time now. It's 8 o'clock and we've so many questions. So I'm going to ask one more question or ask you one more question. And it's the one that I'm looking straight at here. That's probably not a good one to ask you. Am I right in saying EAL students can't have a reader and a bilingual dictionary unless they have extra? I'm thinking of a couple of students we have with very limited English who might meet the criteria for extra time. So am I right in saying that EAL students can't have a reader and a bilingual dictionary unless they have extra time? I think that's supposed to say. I'm thinking of a couple of students we have with very limited English who meet the criteria for extra time.
So I think what the person means there, Rebecca, isn't it, is a bilingual dictionary with 25%
Extra time.
extra
Yeah.
time. So I think my answer there is you have to make the decision. I don't think they would need both. So I think you have to determine actually if their knowledge of the English language is so limited, they are really sort of struggling to use a bilingual dictionary, even with the 25% extra time allowance. They have got really significant reading difficulties. You'd be looking at a computer reader. I don't think they would need both.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. And one very quick one. Should exams officers complete training updates?
No, I mean in terms of obviously the exams officers need to be obviously doing updates around the ICE and general regulations. This presentation and sort of the references there to CPD is for SENCOs because obviously it is the SENCOs or an equivalent member of staff. They are the ones who are making the decisions around access arrangements, determining appropriate access arrangements for candidates with learning difficulties and disabilities. The SENCO or an equivalent member of staff is producing the evidence which they must produce. They must present to a JCQ centre inspector. So it's the Senco and the assessors who need to be focusing on the access arrangements booklet because they are the primary audience for that. Whereas the exams officer is going to be more obviously the ICE instructions for conducting examinations and also the general regulations.
Great. Thank you, Nick. We have so many more questions, but I think everybody needs to go and sit down and rest and digest all this information. And what will happen now is we do have all the questions in the Q&A here. So myself and Nick will record another session to get to all of your questions, and Education Elephant will post it up on our learning platform. But what we shall do is we'll email everybody. You'll all get this recording and you'll all get the PowerPoint slides, and we'll also give you the link to the other session that myself and Nick will do together to get to the rest of your questions, because they're all asking about quite individual circumstances rather than general pieces. Thank you all very much. 2 hours on a Monday evening with myself and Nick talking a lot of rules and regulations. It's testament to you all and testament to the commitment that you have to supporting your students. So thank you very, very much for being here. And we hope that we see you again at some more CPD events with Education Elephant. And also, if you're interested in the Swift, you'd like a demo or you want to get involved, I see people are asking me about beta versions, you can send us in an email and we will get back to you. Loads of thank yous coming in. No need to say thank you. Thank you all for being here and have a wonderful evening. Nick, as always, you're brilliant.
My pleasure, Rebecca.
Thank you very much.
That's okay. No worries.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.